Test. Tanya? Volume testing.
Sounds good on here.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Perfect. Good afternoon and welcome to our long-term financial policy and audit subcommittee. Today is July 13th, 2023, and we will now begin our meeting. Recording secretary, may you please call the roll? Chair Rogers? Present. Member Stapp?
Here.
Member McDonald?
Here.
Let the order reflect that all subcommittee members are present. Thank you. For housekeeping, as members of the public join the meeting virtually, you will be participating as an attendee. Your microphone and camera will be muted. If you are calling in from a telephone and choose to speak during the public comment portion of today's agenda, for privacy concerns, the host will rename your viewable phone number to resident and the last 4 digits of your phone number. Can you please explain how public comment works? At each agenda item, the item is presented. The chair will ask for subcommittee members' comments and then open it up for public comment. The host in Zoom will be lowering all hands until public comment is open for the agenda item. Once the chair has called for public comment, the chair will announce for the public to raise their hand if they wish to speak on the specific agenda item. If you are calling in to listen to the meeting audibly, you can dial *9 to raise your hand. The host will then call on the public who have raised their hands. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes and a timer will appear on the screen for the subcommittee members and public to see. Once all live public comments have been heard, the meeting host will read emails submitted. If you provide a live public comment on an agenda item but also submitted an email, your email will not be read during the meeting. Additionally, there is one public comment period on today's agenda to speak on non-agenda matters, which is item 2. This is the time when any person may address the subcommittee on matters not listed on this agenda. Thank you very much. We'll now go to item 2, public comment on non-agenda items. We are now taking public comment on item 2, non-agenda matters. This is the time when any person may address the subcommittee on matters not listed on this agenda. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you are dialing in via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand.
We have no hands raised and received no emails.
Thank you. Continuing to item 3, approval of minutes. We have one set of minutes that is for our special meeting, April 27th, 2023. Are there any changes or amendments to the minutes? Seeing none, we will adopt the minutes as presented. Moving to item 4. 4.1, our Roseland pavement funding follow-up. Here to present is Assistant City Manager Jason Nutt. Don't do this. And Veronica Conner, Budget Manager. And they will provide us with information on pavement improvements in the Roseland annexation area.
Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Veronica Conner, the Budget Manager, and I'm just going to be introducing this item today before I hand it over to Assistant City Manager Nutt. But I just wanted to mention that we are bringing this forward today because at a previous meeting, we had a member of the public ask some questions about our Roseland pavement funding and progress, and the subcommittee indicated they would like an update and some more information on this subject. So we've put together some information for you that Assistant City Manager Nutt will get into the next slides. And Tanya, I think you can advance the slide, please. You can verbally take it away. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. Chair Rogers, members of the subcommittee, Jason Nutt, Assistant City Manager, the Director of Transportation and Public Works. So we've been wanting to try to come and provide an update on kind of the Roseland improvements that we've been making over the course of time since we actually annexed the final remaining unincorporated area into the city back in 2017. One of the conditions that we arranged or negotiated during the course of that agreement was a transfer of funds from the county to the city in an effort to make improvements within the roadway area. And what that resulted in was an agreement that $6.62 million would be moved to the city in 10 annual installments of $662,000 a year for the benefit of pavement improvements. Now, the question being, what does that mean? What are pavement improvements? And in that particular area, that could be, just some resurfacing. It could be full reconstruction. It could be some type of weather or wearing course. What it doesn't mean is we can't use the money for things outside of pavement. And that was very specified through the course of the negotiations. We couldn't use the money to build a concrete sidewalk. If there was an asphalt walkway adjacent to work we were doing to restore the pavement, that was reasonable and was consistent with the agreement type. So as you'll see in the second bullet, we could do it for a lot of things, but it could only be used for an asphalt product in order to go in. And the only alteration to that is where an ADA ramp is required, we are allowed to rebuild that with a concrete product, but only as required. There's no supplemental infill. And so that kind of limited what we were able to do over the course of time. We've been working on this, quite frankly, a little slow, but we're gearing up. We're moving now as far as implementing those funds. And so next slide, please. So just to give you a viewpoint of what that 10 years looks like and what our anticipated drawdown is. Like I said, we started off slow. We got money that first year in 2018. We really didn't spend a lot of money. We really didn't do it until 2020. And at that point, we had our first conscientious project, which was the reconstruction of Rose Avenue and Sunset Avenue. And that was very significant. Rose Avenue, if you haven't been down there, is a rural street that is connector from Stony Point Road into the community. It's heavily used, fronted by properties, but has very substantial storm drain ditches on either side of the road. And so in this reconstruction, we had to do quite a bit of work in order to bring that up to some level of city standard, recognizing some of the rural characteristic out there. And so that was a great investment. I'll tell you, having been out there, that road was in really poor condition, one of the worst in the areas, and why we focused on it initially. As we've gone through, and the next 4 or 5 slides will start to show you what we've done, we've begun to spend these in a rational and consistent way. Different surfacing types. So Councilmember Stapp, you mentioned, well, what are the different types? I'll touch briefly on it, but we tried to lump like types together so that in this one area, we could take best advantage of those, with the final product ultimately being a complete resurfacing of a number of roads, which is, as you can see, coming in 2025-26 is going to be about a $3 million project. And that'll be the capstone of everything that we're working on. So next slide. So in year one, as we mentioned, 2019, 2020 was our first year. We rebuilt Rose Avenue at Sunset. That was a full reconstruction. Next slide. The next year, we came through with a slurry program. Slurry is a very light asphaltic product that's intended to help rejuvenate the pavement surface itself, but really provide a wearing course. So these are typically done on streets that are in relatively good condition. The attempt is to keep them in good condition. We tend to add anywhere from 6 to 12 years of life every time we do that slurry product. And so the streets that you'll see here were with pavement condition indexes of 60 or greater prior to our treatment. And our attempt is to try to keep them in good condition. The next slide. Moving forward, and this is the upcoming year, we're preparing for this Cape Seal product, which is a twofold product. It allows us to not only do a base type of leveling course, but then we do a cap or a slurry over the top of that. And it's intended to provide that rejuvenation, but it's working on roads that have that 45 to 65 pavement condition index. And so you'll see there's two areas. There's an area here over off of Dutton Avenue, and there's an area at the back end of Hearn Avenue that we're going to be doing that. The first step, which is what's going to occur this summer or this fall, is we're going to be doing all of the ramps. That level of treatment requires through the ADA that we construct curb ramps where they're not up to current standard. So that is the work that's going to happen this year, with then the Cape Seal occurring next summer. Next slide. So then the following year, we're going to start to do a reconstruction project, which is a little less than what we're going to get in the following year. And you'll see there's some purple lines that exist in the right off of Stony Point Road and on the other side of Sebastopol Road. These are roads that typically have pavement condition that are in failing condition. They're generally between a 0 and a 40. And so those are roads where we'll actually take the full pavement surface down, we'll rebuild the sub base where we have to, and then replace the pavement condition back to new in those areas. So we're excited to see that happen. That work is in the process of being designed this winter, so that come 2025, it will be in construction. Next slide. Then the issue is the overlay project. This is the back end of that $3 million. And you'll see there's a number of areas that's populating, some up north of 3rd Street. That was also in the annexation. That's the Pearson area and the West 6th. That was part of the annexation area as well. You'll see West Hearn also gets a full overlay. There's some areas off of Corby Avenue that start to get in there, as well as some connector streets like I think it's Howard that connects Burbank and McMinn. So there's a number of streets that are going to get that overlay in order to be able to restore. Now, what an overlay is you're not replacing any of the structural. You are adding fresh concrete or fresh pavement over the top to build on that structural section to give it that additional 20 years worth of life. It's a great product, but that and the reconstruction combined are very expensive. And so that's where that big $3 million chunk is going to come from. All right, next slide. Also within the annexation was a shift of funds relating to the Roseland Lighting District. Street lighting has had a number of different lives. At one point in time, PG&E owned all of the street lights throughout Santa Rosa as well in the unincorporated areas. When Santa Rosa, well, in the mid-90s, yeah, it was the mid-90s, I think. Santa Rosa actually moved forward and purchased the streetlights from PG&E. There was a large statewide initiative. We felt PG&E was gouging us. We felt there was a better way and a more cost-effective way to manage and move forward with street lighting maintenance on our own. And so we purchased the streetlights from PG&E. There are gaps out there where unincorporated areas or where PG&E felt that they couldn't give us the streetlights that remain in PG&E's hands. In this particular area, in the south part of Highway 12, both in Roseland unincorporated, Roseland incorporated, and a portion of South Park, the county worked with PG&E to establish a lighting district, and that lighting district supports and supplements efforts PG&E does to manage and maintain those streetlights. With the annexation, the county has transferred that lighting district to the city. So there is a pot of funds that are there to enhance and improve from a capital perspective, lighting in there. It does grow, but it doesn't grow a whole heck of a lot. And so we're trying to be very careful and cautious how we do this investment. Right now, there is not a plan moving forward to make this investment. We're going to be developing a program here in the very near future to see what do we need to do. So we've asked the engineering teams to start thinking about community feedback, where they've been told lighting is deficient in certain areas, particularly from a bicycle and pedestrian aspect. And if we were to put out a capital investment, this would be a funding source we might use in order to improve some of those lighting gaps. And so that's where this particular comes from. It is static. We don't have an investment strategy yet, but we're in the process of developing one. And next slide. That concludes kind of the update here for the Roseland pavement. Like I said, it's a slow start. I've had a good conversation with Councilmember Alvarez about this, but assured him that we do have the strategy moving forward and started to outline some of these plans with him. And so that is where we're at. Any questions?
Any question? None from me. Appropriate questions? Yes,
Questions are always appropriate. Two informational ones. What was the logic for pavement only, as opposed to being able to improve sidewalks?
Purely financial.
Okay.
Well, actually, I'm going to go one step further. It was beyond financial.
Why does the county care we spend the money?
So we'd originally made a proposal from a public works perspective of a need of about $18 million to bring the unincorporated areas to the same quality and level of infrastructure that the incorporated areas had on average. The county countered, and the way they presented this kind of went like this. We've neglected this area from a pavement perspective standpoint. We totally admit that, and we should have been X, Y, and Z over the course of time. However, we, the county, don't build curb gutter and sidewalk. We don't build concrete sidewalks. We don't add street lighting. We just do pavement maintenance and storm drain. So when we said we wanted to bring it and elevate it, their counter was we would never have done that under our purview, and therefore we're only willing to give you funds to bring it to our standard, not your standard.
Why would they care at that point? Isn't it? It's our problem, right?
It is our problem, and if the attorney's office were in the room, there's a whole backstory on this negotiation, and
I won't take us down the rabbit hole, but that's interesting.
And realistically, every year I have to call the public work. I'm also required to call the county's public works director, show them our proposal, and get approval to facilitate it that way.
Interesting.
The good news is Johannes and I work very well together, so it's a fairly simple process. But there are conditions in there that seem odd, but it got us $6.62 million that we wouldn't have had otherwise for a community that's in fairly desperate need. And in the end, what we anticipate the average pavement condition in Roseland will likely far exceed the average pavement condition in the city. There will still be bicycle and pedestrian gaps that we can't fill, but from a pavement condition perspective, we'll be in a much better position in that area of town than we would have otherwise.
Okay.
But we needed $18 million and we got 6.
Correct.
Just wondering who negotiated that.
Well, we will not get into that during this meeting. That is a whole nother meeting. Does anyone have any additional questions regarding the presentation?
Yes. Question number 2.
Yeah.
You mentioned that, so the slurry adds 10 to 15 years of life. Did I get that correctly? And then is it cap seal or cape seal?
So a slurry is about 6 to 12.
6 to 12.
The cape seal can get you between 10 to 15, depending upon the wear on that street.
Okay.
An overlay is usually about 20. The way we do reconstruction under our current program, we feel we can get between 25 and 30 years on a reconstruction.
Okay.
Average asphalt for brand new, the industry says 20 years of life. Our specifications, we've been exceeding the average, and we're working really hard to hold that standard because it's the best use of our limited funds.
Okay. That's good to have in the back of my mind. And third and final question, and I'm assuming that Councilmember Alvarez has already been in your ear about this one with the Sebastopol light or Sebastopol street lighting. I'm surprised at the number of times that's been mentioned to me. I'm assuming that's part of our thinking.
So Sebastopol Road was already a city street. It wasn't part of the annexation area at this time. So funds that were brought in here couldn't have been used on Sebastopol Road. Now, what I need to go back and look at is whether the Roseland Lighting District includes areas of Sebastopol Road, and it might.
Okay.
It might not include the whole stretch. Again, everything's kind of quilt-wise when it came to these areas in Southwest with the county. There's pockets all over that are slightly different than other neighborhoods. So I'd have to double check, but that would be an area, for example, if we wanted to invest that $500,000, we may be able to use it on Sebastopol Road if that's within the district.
That's interesting to know. I just wanted to flag that Sebastopol Road had been brought up to me, and I'm assuming you were already aware of the issue, that even though there's existing lighting there, it's not satisfactory according to several business owners.
Yeah, that particular project, there's a whole lot of investment evaluation that was done in the Wayback Machine 20 years ago when they did the corridor plan. And so the lighting that you see out there was implemented as a function of that. Whether or not it's consistent was whether or not the city and county line existed in a certain spot.
That's really interesting. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks for the input though on the lighting complaints.
I'm good.
All right. We will now go into public comment for item 4.1, the Roseland pavement funding follow-up. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you are dialing in via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. Zoom host, is there anyone wishing to make a comment?
I don't see any hands raised, and we received, there's no one on no one calling in, so.
Thank you. So that will conclude 4.1. We will now go to 4.2, our long-range financial forecast update and general fund revenue overview. Chief Financial Officer Alan Alton will provide an update on the long-range financial forecast and overview of the general fund revenue.
Thank you, Chair Rogers and member of the committee. So we wanted to, this was going to be a pretty light agenda today to make it worth your while to come in. Thought I would throw some fun numbers at you and go from here as we round out the afternoon. Next slide, please. So with the adoption of the budget, we've updated our long-range financial forecast. So what you have here is the update of that, and it includes the actions that were taken at the budget adoption, which added about $800,000 to our deficit ongoing. The forecast has the same assumptions as before. So what you're seeing are all of our most likely revenue estimates and known costs that we have going through. So it doesn't include labor contracts and those things that are unknown. We did use our fiscal stability reserves in order to address the deficit. That brought those reserves down to about $24 million. Just for reference on that, if we did nothing and just let this forecast play out the way it is, we would exhaust those reserves by the end of the forecast. So it does eat that up. And again, that's not addressing labor concerns or labor contracts, which we will be going into negotiations on that soon as they expire at the end of this fiscal year. And as what you'll hear from me and the city manager going forward on this is that this obviously isn't sustainable it's just not sustainable from any standpoint. So additional budget increases going forward are going to need to have either a corresponding reduction or an addition in revenue. That's the only way that we're going to bring ourselves back. And going into the next budget, obviously we're going to need to start addressing that now. So it's just part of the reality there, but that does segue into a discussion on revenues. So the next slide, please. So these are our tax-based revenues, and if we are going to, these are the revenues that we actually have the most control over making changes, although we do have control over making changes to fees and other charges too, but I'll focus mainly on taxes as these are our major sources of revenue. I do not include property tax on that because we do not make changes to those. We can't unless we're going to go out for a general obligation bond. But our major tax sources are there. These just show the 5 years average. We segregate out the sales tax from our 1% Bradley Burns tax that comes in. And then in addition to that, we have our general fund add-on taxes. So we have back in 1718, we had 1/4 cent add-on tax that was general. Beginning in, I believe it was 1819, and in full effect in 1920, we added a second one that was for fire recovery, I believe. And then in 2020, right? I think we combined both of them to be Measure Q, which is just a 1/2 cent general tax. So we have our Bradley Burns and we have two add-ons. One is the public safety one, and then one is a 1/2 cent general tax. As you can see, roughly a 1/4 cent sales tax runs about $10 to $11 million that we get in. 1/2 cent, we're at 23 million. Our transient occupancy tax, well, actually, we can go on to the next slide. I go into more detail there. So this is kind of what I was heading on before, is that in the general fund, we have taxes for revenues, we have taxes, we have fees and other charges for service. Our fees may not exceed the reasonable cost of providing those services. So that's why we will do nexus studies. We will do other types of fee studies to ensure that we're meeting the reasonable cost of performing those services and having our fees address that. Council can change those at the dais. There are two exceptions to taxes that that may only, let me say that again. Taxes are increased by the voters. There are two exceptions to that. You cannot increase property taxes, as I mentioned before, unless we're doing a general obligation bond, and then you have that. Cannabis industry tax, that we actually wrote into the ordinance where that may be increased by council. Next slide, please. So that brings us to our tax revenue overview. So our sales taxes, as I mentioned before, we had the Bradley Burns 1% sales tax. That's basically a point of sale sales tax that comes in. Our additional amounts, which were agreed to by voters, and I gave you the dimensions there. Those are actually transaction and use taxes. And those are simple majority for general tax measures. Our transient occupancy tax right now is 9%. We have two assessments for tourism that are on top of that. So we have a 3% BIA for Santa Rosa tourism, and then we have a 2% for Sonoma County tourism. So when you combine them all together, we have a 14% rate that goes that people renting lodging pay. However, only that 9% goes into the general fund. The 9% is the lowest in Sonoma County, I believe. We have not raised that in a while. I would estimate that if we, it would be about $500,000 a percent. I think it comes out to the last time we did an analysis of it. Utility users tax. So we have a 5% tax. It's on telephone, electricity, gas, and in our ordinance it's video, but it's really cable. That tax is capped at $1,000. I would.
By the state.
Pardon?
Not by the state.
No, by us, by ordinance. And it's at that cap, our residential customers, especially for PG&E, never hit the cap. We do have businesses that will actually exceed it. There is a mechanism in place. If they realize that they've exceeded the cap, they can request a refund and we refund those back. They can also prepay, and then that stops the collection by PG&E. We did go out in, I believe it was 2014, to address our telephone utility users tax. It essentially only taxes landlines. It does not tax tax cell phones or other mobile devices. So we're one of the few cities that has a UUT that is not modernized. Anyway, we tried to modernize back in 2014. There was a pretty vigorous opposition campaign to it, and we lost. To be fair, we didn't really put much of a campaign out ourselves. Obviously, if we ever went out again, we would have more of an education effort on that. In my view, it seems like it could be a bit regressive if you think of who has landlines and who may not. I mean, personally, I only have a cell phone. I don't have a landline. It's not fair that I don't pay into that tax, but right now I don't. We have business tax. Business tax is a tax based on gross receipts for business activity within Santa Rosa. This is capped at $3,000. What that means is that if you are a very large business or a very small business, you're paying right up to the same cap. So that is something that we have looked at in the past, but we have not gone out and tried any type of changes to that ordinance with the voters. I don't think since I've been here we've tried that. It gets complicated to try to explain what we're doing and how we would do it. I have some ideas on what we could do, but those are still just kind of on a whiteboard. So, and with that, that's just a really quick, broad overview. But I think it's important to start bringing up what we have in front of us to be able to address the deficits that we're going to see and that we'll see for the foreseeable future, but we need to start getting that plan together to bring things more in line.
Thank you for that presentation. Do we have any questions?
I do.
Yes, Councilmember Sapp.
Fatigued already. All right. Maybe you mentioned it, but with the changes in the long-term deficits, is that primarily, or the changes that we're seeing now as compared to the last time that we met or in council, are they primarily due to the 4 positions we added to the police department?
Yeah. So everything else stayed the same.
Okay.
We changed the first year and then everything else went out from there. But yeah, it's the addition of those positions.
I just wanted to confirm. And then with the detailed revenue chart, that was interesting. It's the first time I've seen a multi-year projection like this. I just wanted to make sure that I was reading it correctly. With this sales tax number, and granted it's a strange 5 years because you have the fires and you had the pandemic, and so it's not a typical 5-year period. But when accounting for inflation, it looked like our sales tax revenues has been roughly, flat over the last 5 years. Is that an accurate way to look at that data?
Yeah. Well,
it's also worth noting that the Bradley Burns is one line item, but that sales tax add-on, we did have an increase of 0.25% there between
That's true.
17, 18, 19, 20. So that was a big incremental change.
That's true. I was just looking at that. Well, I was just thinking about the Bradley Burns. Well, I was thinking about the Bradley Burns and the business tax. Because the business tax adjusted for inflation, well, frankly, it's kind of gone down, inflation adjusted over the past 5 years.
Yeah.
But then you mentioned the cap, $3,000 cap, which is helpful. So when I look at that business tax, does that actually reflect a true flatlining of business activity? Or because it's capped at 3,000, do we have enough businesses that are larger that we still have a little bit of an upward trend for business activity?
so that's part of the analysis that we're doing. So I've reached out to our consultant to start looking at that. But yeah, if you figure, if you've got a cap in there, the businesses could be doing great. And what we did see during COVID, we actually saw increases in sales. There was one quarter where we didn't. That was where everything was shut down at the March or April through June of 2020, where just everything was shut down and it was the shelter in place orders. We saw a decrease in sales tax then. However, we also saw increases in other areas, right? There's difference in the Bradley Burns is one type, but our transaction and use actually comes in a little bit hotter at times. And so that's why we just kind of take it as a whole and go from there. But in general speaking, aside from that one quarter, we did far better from a sales tax standpoint than we thought we would, or that a lot of the sales tax experts in the state thought that sales tax in general would do. And I would say just locally for Santa Rosa alone, we did quite well.
We had a lot of wine.
Yes.
That was a big boom during that time. I remember the sales tax was huge increase during just
there's
the product.
Right. And if you think of it this way, you had online sales went crazy. You have stimulus money that went into the economy. So a lot of folks took that and spent it then, or they banked it and then spent it later. When the inflationary times started going up, when inflation skyrocketed, that boosted our sales tax numbers, right? Because things are a higher cost, therefore a higher sales tax. So we saw a lot of that as now inflation starts to taper off and stabilize, and the stimulus money is no longer out there for the most part. We're seeing, that's why we're predicting and showing our sales tax from a forecasting standpoint to not go down, but to level. And the effect of it leveling seems like it's going down, right? So that's what we're dealing with. What I would say is that from an overall economic standpoint, from a sales tax perspective, Santa Rosa is still a very strong economy from there. So anyway, but I thought it would be good to show you the past trends. We do have some dips that are in there, so you kind of have to take that in. Unfortunately, a good straight line doesn't really work too well because you got to factor those other things in, but it gives you a sense of where we're going. And, you know, our tourism, our TOT is being boosted because coming out of the pandemic, tourism went up. And to be quite honest,
Still below 17, 18. That really caught me off guard. Down 10%.
yeah,
Non-inflation adjusted since 17, 18.
yeah.
17, 18 also was the year of the
Was-
fires. We had a lot of people
Yeah.
displaced and hotels that
That
have
was-
been artificially high.
All the fire departments too that came in to help fight it.
It's true. Yeah,
That's
it's
a really good information.
been an anomaly almost every year, it seems.
So that-
Yeah.
So this isn't part of a long-term
Yeah.
Correct.
decline.
If we could go out and we can do this, you can go out and go even further years past and pull a trend line that kind of takes out all of those dips and anomalies, you're going to see that we're going the way that we should go.
Okay. That's reassuring.
And
There should be a bullet point on the slide.
well, and yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, we when we go through this, we see those things and the red flags pop up, and then you realize, as Veronica says, we go look at the data and go, oh, that's why we had this happen and that. There always seems to be something. Short-term rentals also came in. I think I mentioned at council that probably $1 million or so is coming in just short-term rentals at all. So it's boosting that, which is good. It's part of our tourism industry. So that's part of from me, from a pure revenue standpoint, policy aside, I look at that and say, all right. But yeah.
And that was the end of my questions, but then just to add a note of encouragement to your additional tax noodling, especially with respect to the business tax cap. That would, I think speaking for myself, I'd certainly be interested in hearing some spitballing at some point in the future.
So and we will in the future, in future meetings, have those discussions in here as we kind of bring those strategies a little bit more into focus. I have brought in somebody that we've worked with in the past to try to look at how that would look like and how it would look like from an opinion survey standpoint as well. So these are all things that are just at the very beginning, but we knew coming out of budget that we have to now start going full pace into this. We're into July right now, so we've got the people in line that we need to be working with to try to figure out what our next steps are from that standpoint. From a budget team standpoint, we'll be going to our departments and putting out guidelines that are for flat budgets. I think we mentioned that before, but that's what our next years will be. We need to keep our expenditures as flat as we possibly can. We need to look as departments, and I think as the council as well, when we have problems that are in the community, I think our first question needs to be, how can we solve this with our existing resources? And should we not be able to do that, then how do we pivot to adding additional resources, knowing that if we don't have the revenue to back it up, we're going to have to lose something else. So we're into those parts of that.
Message received. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Mayor McDonald?
Yeah, it was really around the taxes. I think what's helpful to know are the several different taxes that we have, how long it's been since the ordinance has been reviewed by council, and if there's any caps that are in place, and then what ones that we can do by ordinance and what ones have to go out to voters. And I think there's so many different ones as you look at the biggest ones. I'd be also interested to know on the TOT, what our surrounding areas are charging. If we're at 9%, is Hillsburg at 12 or 14? I mean, go to Anaheim, they're like very, very high. So I think that as we look at other industries, as far as tourism goes, I would want to know some of those things because 9%, even though you're adding on the other things, if you look at the other jurisdictions or even like down in those busy areas, we don't have Disneyland, but we certainly have the wine industry, which is adult attraction. So I'd be curious to know if you're talking 1% can bring in $500,000 to our budget, that's significant in revenue to me. So as you start to do those conversations, those would be things I'd be interested in.
Yeah, what we will bring back
Great.
as we start looking at this, and I apologize, I do have a chart that shows where we were. We've done all this in the past, and so it's just kind of refreshing it. I want to say Healdsburg is 16, but I'm not 100% sure there.
There's city taxes, including the other bumps.
I don't think they have a BIA.
Okay.
Well, I know they don't have the Santa Rosa one, and
Right.
I don't believe they are part of the Sonoma County Tourism BIA. What we will do is part of that analysis comes into where we are in the county overall, and what the increase could do, and how that all plays out. Some of those are difficult to gauge. I mean, if you're and you want to take into consideration, fairness issues, right? I mean, probably where I would come from if we were looking at a business tax or something like that is if we're raising a cap, I would want to, my initial reaction would be to raise the cap on those businesses that could afford that. We don't want to harm our small businesses. We need that as a part of our economy. And so there's a lot of thought and analysis that would have to go in. Then we would come to this body and go through all of that with you. And it would be a recommendation from this group before I would take anything to the council. So your questions would be vetted and answered and to your satisfaction before we would ever go to the county or to the council with, and it would be your recommendation to move forward with that.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. And for yours too, Jason.
Any additional questions? No. Seeing none, we'll now take public comment for 4.2, which is our long range financial forecast update and general fund revenue overview.
And there are no hands raised and there's no one calling in.
Thank you. We will now discuss any possible agenda items for the next, well, we came up with a few while we were sitting here, like you, but are there any additional?
Yeah, there's no time frame on that, but I think as we look at the deficit, those are things that I would be interested in knowing, you could cut these things or we're going to have to come in with more revenue.
Right.
That's the decision the council, I think, needs to be shown.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I do have an item for August. Our next meeting is August 10th. That's the next regular meeting. I do have an item for that to put on the agenda. Beyond that, we will, when we are closer with our analysis and we're ready to prepare or present, that's when we'll get those on the agenda going out. In October, at the end of October is when you'll have the update of this past fiscal year end that just ended. So we'll have our year end update for you. We'll have by then, our books will have been closed into the auditors. And that's our first opportunity to have an unaudited but good sense of where we ended the last fiscal year. But for August, we will put on the agenda a discussion on a home loan program. We should be prepared to talk about that then.
Thank you. Mark, do you have anything?
Maybe, actually, home loan, would that, is it possible to expand that to a more general housing assistance, small scale?
Yes, I mean, that's the general idea.
I'm talking about folks who are, 500 short on their rent.
Oh, that's, okay, we have, that's a down payment.
It's more of a, is it ever done? I mean, it's run through other kinds of federal assistance programs.
Yeah,
We have items coming to council, obviously with the mobile home ordinance.
Right.
Where we're talking about small amounts of money. We're trying to figure out how to finagle that. For talking about, home loan assistance, is it possible to talk about other kinds of smaller micro lending?
So let me be clear. The home loan assistance is more of a city employee home loan assistance.
That's interesting too.
Yeah. So, and
We've discussed it.
yeah. So that's why I'm sorry. I don't mean to be cagey about that, but we don't have somebody from the attorney's office here, and I'm not sure just how broad I can be. I would just say that's
what he's referring to.
Yeah.
There are all kinds of housing assistance programs.
We do have through our housing and community services, we do have housing assistance, and we do have a down payment program that we are doing with PG&E money to fund that. So, pardon?
Universal basic income.
Yes. Oh, yes, that too, through our.
I was aware there were some programs, but yeah. Anyway, question answered.
Yeah.
My only other suggestion would be that I miss our macroeconomic speculation. We didn't talk about interest rates movements.
Sure.
For the muni markets.
Yeah.
That's a joke, of course. That was my non-serious question for the afternoon.
You're allowed,
But
you're allowed one.
If you can
Only
crowbar
one
those
now.
in the future, I enjoy those.
No problem.
Well, seeing no additional suggestions for agenda items and seeing no additional items on this agenda, we will now adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Are we muted?